I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, close to the small town I needed to visit for a work meeting, and the photos made it look decent enough. It was a single-room guest house behind someone's home, just a box-shaped little building with a bathroom and a kitchenette. I had stayed in stranger places before, so nothing about it bothered me when I arrived late in the evening. The main house was dark, and the host had said in the app that he would be out of town, which honestly made things easier because I just wanted peace. When I parked next to the guest house, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the entire street felt. There were no kids playing outside, no dogs barking, no people talking on porches, just a long row of houses with dim porch lights glowing over empty lawns. The sun was already down, and the only sound I heard was the crunch of the gravel under my shoes. I carried my backpack inside, locked the door behind me, and tried to shake off the strange stillness. Inside, the place looked exactly like the photos. A small bed with a gray blanket, a tiny fridge, a microwave, and a single chair beside a narrow table. The bathroom was clean, and everything smelled like lemon cleaner. I actually felt relieved for a moment. It wasn't fancy, but I didn't need fancy. I just needed a quiet night before my meeting the next morning. I set my things down, plugged in my phone, and tried to relax. I even opened my laptop and played some soft music just to fill the silence. After a few minutes, the quiet outside felt less strange. I made myself a sandwich from the snacks I brought and sat on the bed scrolling through my phone. About an hour later, I heard the first noise. It was faint, like something scraping lightly against wood. I thought it was coming from outside, maybe from the fence or the side of the main house. The wind could have been pushing something, but the air outside had been still when I arrived. I tried to ignore it, but then it came again. A slow, dragging scrape that lasted longer this time. It wasn't loud. It was almost too quiet to notice, but because everything else around me was so silent, it stood out. I paused my music and sat still, listening. The sound came again, this time followed by something like a dull thud against the wall. A soft, heavy impact. It was low to the ground, maybe near the base of the wall behind the bed. I turned my head slowly and stared at that wall, half expecting a shadow to move or some obvious explanation to show itself. But nothing happened. I sat for a minute waiting, but after that last thud, the noise stopped. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the neighbor had something leaning against their side of the fence. I forced myself to focus on my laptop again, though I kept glancing at the wall every few seconds. It was around 10 p.m. when things actually started to feel wrong. I went to brush my teeth in the bathroom, and while I was rinsing my mouth, the motion sensor light above the guest house door outside flicked on. Through the tiny frosted bathroom window, I saw the sudden wash of white light spill across the yard. It wasn't unusual, maybe a cat ran past or something, but the part that bothered me was that the sensor had a pretty small range. Something had to move very close to the door to set it off. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. When the light turned off again, the yard went back to pitch black. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I could feel the air growing heavier inside the small room. I finished up in the bathroom and went back to the bed. I checked the lock on the door again, even though I knew I had already locked it when I came in. The deadbolt was still turned all the way, but I tested it anyway, pushing the door gently to make sure it was secure. That was when I realized something else. The curtains over the small window near the kitchenette were slightly parted. Just a tiny split, maybe an inch or two wide, but I didn't remember leaving them like that. When I had arrived, I had closed them all the way. I was almost certain of it. I stood there, staring at the gap, trying to convince myself I was misremembering. It wouldn't be the first time my mind filled in details wrong after a long drive. Still, I stepped over and pulled the curtains shut tightly. I told myself to sleep early, that everything would feel normal in the morning. But the atmosphere in the room refused to settle. Every small sound, the fridge humming, the air shifting through the vents, felt sharper than usual. I lay down anyway, turned off the light, and closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep right away. I just kept listening. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps. Not inside. Outside on the gravel next to the guest house. Slow, uneven steps like someone walking carefully, trying not to make too much noise. Each step crunched the gravel in a way that instantly froze me. The steps moved past the window and then stopped right by the wall where I had heard the scraping earlier. I held my breath and stayed completely still. After a long pause, the footsteps moved again, circling slowly around the building. I could picture the path in my mind, someone creeping around the perimeter, maybe just a few feet away from where I lay. I didn't move at all. I didn't even lift my head from the pillow. I knew that any sound I made might give away that I was awake. Then I heard it, a soft, careful push on the door handle. Just one tiny shift of metal, like someone checking it slowly, testing if it would turn, testing if the door would open. But the deadbolt held. The person outside didn't try again. They seemed to know the door was locked. Instead, the footsteps moved away from the door and stopped beside the kitchenette window. That small window, that window with the curtains I had found slightly open. I felt a cold wave move from my chest down to my stomach. My hands were sweating. I stared up at the ceiling in the dark, barely breathing, imagining someone standing right outside that window, inches from the glass, trying to look in. Minutes passed. I didn't hear anything else. I must have stayed awake until almost dawn, listening for any movement. The sound never came back. When the first gray light of morning slipped through the curtains, I finally forced myself to get up. My body felt stiff, like I'd been bracing myself for hours. I packed fast. I didn't even brush my teeth. I just stuffed everything into my backpack and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I stopped cold. In the gravel right outside the door, there were footprints. Not deep ones, but fresh enough to still show the shape of a shoe sole. They led from the side of the guest house directly to the door, then around the building, the same way I had heard them move during the night. I stared at them for a long moment, shaking slightly, knowing I had not imagined anything. I walked around the building, following the tracks. They stopped right beneath the kitchenette window, the exact spot where the curtains had been parted. The dirt was slightly disturbed under the window, the way it looks when someone crouches for a while. The ground was flattened in one small place, like a knee or a foot had been pressing there. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't check the rest of the yard. I didn't want to see anything else. I went straight to my car, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel that I had to pull over 3 blocks away just to calm down enough to drive safely. Later that day, after my meeting, I checked the Airbnb listing again. The host still hadn't come back online. The last review on the listing was from months ago. No one had stayed there recently, and I realized something else. Something that made my stomach sink all over again. The curtains in the listing photos? They were pinned shut. Pinned, not hanging loose like the ones I found, which meant someone had unpinned them before I ever arrived. Someone had already been inside that guest house at some point, someone who wanted that window partly open. Someone who had been waiting for a night when a guest would be inside alone. I never found out who it was. I never contacted the host again. I just left the review blank and moved on. But sometimes, late at night, when I hear small sounds outside my own window, I remember those footprints in the gravel and the flattened dirt under the window. And I keep my curtains closed no matter what. I booked the Airbnb for me and my friend because we wanted a quiet weekend away from everything. We both had stressful schedules, barely slept, barely talked to anyone outside of work, and we thought a small break somewhere peaceful would fix at least a little bit of that. The listing was cheap, a little cabin-style house at the edge of a small town, and we didn't really care about anything other than having a place to stay and relax. The photos showed a simple living room, 2 separate bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a backyard that opened up into a line of trees. It looked clean enough and basic. No luxury, just a place to rest. We didn't look too deeply into the reviews. They were short but positive, saying it was quiet and private. When we arrived late in the afternoon, the first thing that felt strange was the street itself. Every other house looked worn down, run down, or abandoned. We saw no cars, no people outside, no one walking a dog. Nothing. Just a long row of quiet homes with curtains drawn tight. Even the sky felt muted, like the whole street had a muted, heavy air. The Airbnb house was one of the newer looking ones, but even it looked older than the photos. The paint was faded and chipped in a few places, and the wooden porch felt soft under our steps, like it had water damage. The yard was empty. No plants, no decorations, just dry dirt and a tangled fence. Inside, the cabin was cleaner than the outside, but it had a smell that made both of us look around more carefully. It wasn't a bad smell, just an old smell, like a room that had been closed for too long, with no windows opened and no one living in it for weeks or even months. The living room was simple, a couch that sagged slightly in the middle, a low table with tiny scratches all over it, and a small TV that looked like it hadn't been turned on in a long time. The two bedrooms were across from each other on a short hallway. Each room had a bed, a dresser, and a single window facing either the street or the backyard. My friend took the room facing the yard. I took the room facing the street. The windows were closed, the curtains hanging still, and the locks on the windows looked like someone had replaced them recently. They were newer than the rest of the room, shiny metal against older wood frames. As the sun started to set, the inside of the house grew darker much faster than I expected. The lighting felt dim even when we turned on the lamps. Something about the house ate up the light, as if the walls were absorbing it. I kept noticing small things. Tiny chips on the walls, a corner of the carpet slightly lifted, a scratch near the bedroom door, a dent on the back of the bedroom dresser. Things that didn't mean much individually, but made the place feel lived in by someone who didn't care. My friend walked around the house, checking everything out, and we settled in for the evening. We wanted to make food, so we went into the kitchen. That room felt colder than the rest of the house. The tile floor almost felt damp, like something underneath was keeping it chilled. The fridge hummed loudly, and the light inside flickered when we opened it. The backyard, seen through the window, looked even darker than before. The trees stood like a wall of shadows, unmoving. There was no wind at all. It felt like the whole world outside the house was holding its breath. As night came in full, we tried to relax in the living room, but the silence felt thick. The house made noises, not normal ones, but slow, heavy ones that came from different places. A soft shift in the ceiling, a quiet tapping from the pipes, a faint creak at the back door. None of these sounds were loud enough to panic over, but when you hear them in a house you don't know, every noise feels like a message. At one point, the floorboards in the hallway made a long, dragging sound. Not like someone stepping on them, more like something heavy being slowly pulled over the wood. We both froze for a second, listening. The sound stopped before either of us could react. It was strange staying somewhere so silent yet full of small sounds. By the time it was around midnight, we were both tired, so we went to our rooms. I closed my door and lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, but the house felt too awake for me to relax. The air felt heavier now. The smell of the old wood was stronger. I could hear faint noises from somewhere. Not loud, not clear, just faint shifting, almost like someone brushing against a wall slowly. A little while later, I heard something else. A slow, soft step. Then another, light, careful, spaced out, coming from the direction of the living room. I stayed completely still. My friend's room was on the other end of the hallway. They weren't the type to walk around at night, and even if they did, their steps wouldn't be that soft or that slow. I waited. The steps came again. A faint creak, then another, but this time from the middle of the hallway. Very slow, very controlled. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deeply. I stared at the wall in front of me, trying to convince myself it was old wood shifting. Then the sound came from right outside my bedroom door. A pressure on the floorboards, a soft crack, a slow release. Someone was standing there. I could feel it through the silence. I stared at the bottom of the door, watching for movement. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow shift slightly, like someone adjusting their stance. Minutes passed, or maybe it was only seconds. Time felt strange. Then the floorboard outside gave a small creak again, but this time in the direction of my friend's room. Slow, controlled steps moved down the hallway, and then everything went silent again. I waited as long as I could before I forced myself to sit up. My chest felt tight, my arms tense, but I needed to check on my friend. I opened my door slowly. The hallway was dark except for a tiny bit of moonlight coming from the living room window. The floor felt cold under my feet as I stepped out. Nothing moved. No sound came from anywhere. I reached my friend's door and pushed it open carefully. My friend was there, asleep, but something was wrong with the room. The window facing the backyard was slightly open. Just an inch, but we had checked them earlier. It had been locked, and the air coming through it was cold in a way that didn't feel right. Like the cold wasn't from the weather but from something else, something stale. I closed the window without waking my friend and locked it again. My heart was racing now. When I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed a small detail I had missed before. A faint smudge on the wall near my bedroom door. A fingerprint. Not mine. Not my friend's. I backed away, grabbed my bag from my room, and shook my friend awake. They saw the look on my face, saw I had my bag, and immediately understood the seriousness of the situation without a single word needing to be said. We both moved fast. We walked down the hallway, trying to make as little noise as possible. The air felt different now, thicker, like whoever had been in the house earlier was still here or had left only moments ago. When we reached the living room, something made me stop for a second. The back door, the one leading to the backyard, was unlocked. Not wide open, not cracked, just unlocked. We didn't check it earlier. We hadn't gone near it, and someone had turned the lock. I grabbed my friend's arm, and we both rushed out the front door and straight to the car. The night outside felt deeper and heavier, like the darkness itself was watching us. I didn't look back at the house while we threw our bags into the car and got in. As we drove away, I glanced in the side mirror. The curtain in the living room window was pushed to the side. A hand was holding it, just enough for someone inside the house to watch us leave. When we got home the next morning, we started searching the listing so we could report everything. But the entire Airbnb page had disappeared. The owner account, the reviews, the photos, gone in less than 12 hours. We never found out who had been inside the house with us. Maybe someone living in the crawl space. Maybe someone sneaking in through the backyard every night. Maybe someone who knew the lock codes better than the guests did. But I do know one thing for sure. Whoever stood outside our rooms that night was not the owner. And whoever held that curtain open wanted us to know they were right there, close enough to reach either of us, just watching the whole time. If we had stayed even one more hour, I don't think either of us would have made it out of that house. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to stay for 2 nights while I attended a training workshop outside a small town. It was the cheapest place anywhere near the area, and I didn't feel like spending a lot just to have a bed for a couple of nights. The listing showed a small cabin behind a larger house, separated by a tall wooden fence. The description said it was private, clean, and peaceful. That was all I needed. The drive up to the town took longer than I expected. By the time I reached the neighborhood, the sun was already gone and the sky had turned that deep blue shade right before full darkness. The road leading to the Airbnb was narrow, lined with big trees that blocked most of the light. The houses were spaced far apart with long driveways and deep shadows between them. When I turned into the driveway of the property, my headlights lit up the fence and a small wooden gate. I parked near the gate, grabbed my bag, and made my way to the cabin. The walkway was dim, with only one motion light above the host's garage flickering every few seconds. When I reached the cabin, I noticed the door had a keypad. The host had sent me the code earlier. I typed it in, heard a soft click, and stepped inside. The cabin was small but better than I expected. A single bed, a small table, a kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom. Everything smelled like pine wood and cleaning spray. There were no windows facing the main house, only 2 windows that looked out toward the backyard, which was pitch black at that hour. I turned on the lights, set my bag down, and tried to unwind after the long drive. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I ate a sandwich, sat on the bed scrolling through my phone, and then unpacked my clothes. I checked the bathroom, the closet, even the corners of the cabin out of habit. Nothing felt strange, just quiet. Almost too quiet, but I figured that's what I had wanted. Around 10:30 p.m., I noticed something odd. The motion light outside flicked on again, even though I was inside the cabin with the door closed. At first, I thought maybe a stray cat triggered it. But when I tried to look outside through the window, all I saw was the dim light hitting the edge of the cabin's own porch. Everything beyond that was just darkness. I went back to the bed, trying not to overthink it, but then the light went off again. A few seconds later, it flicked on a second time, then off, then on again. It wasn't rhythmic. It wasn't steady. Felt random. I put down my phone and just sat there listening. The only sound inside the cabin was the low hum of the mini fridge. Outside, nothing. Not even a breeze. Just that light flicking on and off like something kept triggering the sensor. I reminded myself that animals, wind, even bugs sometimes set those things off. I tried to ignore it, but when it kept happening, I finally stood up and pulled the curtain just a little to peek out. The light turned off the moment I looked. Then after a long second, it flicked on again. This time, the beam of light hit something at the far edge of the yard, something low to the ground. At first, I thought it was a tree stump, but then the shape shifted slightly, just enough that I realized it wasn't a stump. Whatever it was, it moved the tiniest bit right before the light shut off again. I closed the curtain fast and backed away from the window. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably an animal hunched down. The yard looked huge on the listing photos. Anything could be out there. A raccoon, a dog wandering around, even a deer. But something about the shape bothered me. It didn't look like an animal. It looked lower, narrower, like a person crouched down. I kept the curtains closed after that. An hour passed, and nothing happened. The motion light stayed off, which made me feel a little stupid for scaring myself. I brushed my teeth, washed up, and lay down on the bed. I turned off the lights and stared at the ceiling, trying to relax enough to fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. I wasn't sure what time it was at first because the room was so dark, but I knew exactly why I woke up. The motion light outside was flicking on and off again. This time, it wasn't random. Came on, stayed on for a few seconds, clicked off, and then immediately came back on like something was moving around continuously. I sat up slowly, trying not to make noise. I stared at the curtains. Even though I couldn't see anything through them, my heart started beating hard, not fast, just heavy. I could feel every thump against my ribs. The light kept going. Off, over and over. Then, in the silence between the clicks, I heard something brush against the outside wall of the cabin. A soft dragging sound, almost like someone's sleeve or shoulder pressing against the wood as they walked past it. The sound was slow, steady, moving from one side of the cabin to the other. I froze completely. No hotel or apartment I'd ever stayed in made me feel trapped like that tiny cabin did in that moment. Every corner suddenly felt too close, every shadow too dark, every sound too clear. The brushing sound continued until it reached the window closest to the bed. Then it stopped. The motion light turned off. Then, after 3 long seconds, it lit up again. I didn't move the curtain this time. Couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the window, imagining someone standing right outside it, inches away from me but separated by only a thin wall and a sheet of glass. Minutes passed. I couldn't tell how many. I didn't hear any footsteps. No talking, no breathing, just silence. But the silence itself felt too heavy, like something was holding it still. Eventually, the motion light stopped turning on. It stayed off completely, as if whatever was out there had moved out of its range. I sat awake until dawn. The moment I saw a bit of light through the curtains, I got up, packed everything, and unlocked the door as quietly as I could. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit me, and for a second I just stood there, afraid to look around the yard. But when I finally forced myself to look, I saw them. Footprints. Not animal tracks, shoe prints. Clear ones. Fresh enough that the dew hadn't fully filled them in yet. They led from the far end of the yard straight toward the cabin. Straight to the windows. They circled the cabin. They stopped by the door. And at one point, right under the bedroom window, the dirt was pressed down deeper, like someone had crouched there for a long time. Too long. My hands started shaking, and I felt a wave of cold move through my whole body. I didn't even check the rest of the yard. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away. I didn't bother telling the host anything. I didn't leave a review. I just wanted to be gone. Later that afternoon, while sitting in the parking lot of a diner, I opened the Airbnb app again to see the listing. Maybe someone else had mentioned weird things happening. The listing was gone. Not updated. Not edited. Completely disappeared. The host's profile had no picture anymore. No listings. No reviews. Nothing. Like the place had never existed at all. I still think about the footprints, the pressed down dirt under the window, the shape I saw in the yard, the brushing on the wall. Someone was out there watching, moving around the cabin for hours. I don't know if it was the host or some stranger who knew that cabin stayed empty sometimes. I don't know if they were waiting for me to fall asleep or checking how easy it would be to get inside. All I know is that I wasn't imagining anything. And now, every time I stay in an Airbnb, I check the yard before it gets dark. I check the motion lights. I check the windows. And I never ignore strange sounds ever again. I booked the Airbnb because all the hotels in the area were way too expensive for the short work trip I needed to take. It was listed as a renovated basement apartment attached to a house on the edge of a small town. The photos looked clean, the price was low, and the reviews seemed fine. I didn't think much about the fact that the most recent review was 4 months old. I just wanted a place to sleep, write some notes for my project, and leave early the next morning. I arrived late in the evening, just after sunset. The house sat at the end of a long, quiet street lined with tall pine trees. The driveway was steep and cracked in places, with weeds pushing through the concrete. When I parked and got out of my car, the air smelled like cold dirt and wet leaves. The host wasn't around, but he had sent the check-in instructions through the app. The basement entrance was around the back of the house. I followed a narrow path along the side, squeezing past a trash bin and an old-looking lawnmower half covered with a tarp. The air felt colder there, as if sunlight never reached that side of the house. At the bottom of 3 cement steps, there was a white door with a faint rust stain near the bottom edge. The key was in a small lockbox hanging from the doorknob. Inside, the basement apartment was cleaner than I expected. A small couch sat against one wall, a bed against the other, and a kitchenette with a mini fridge filled the corner. The ceiling was low enough that I could touch it with my palm if I stretched a little. There was only one window, one small, horizontal rectangle placed high on the wall, level with the ground outside. Through it, I could see nothing but the base of the house's siding and the bottom of the bushes. The air inside had a faint damp smell, like old carpet that had been cleaned too many times. Not awful, but noticeable. The place was cold too, so I turned on the small space heater near the bed. It hummed loudly, rattling a little, but at least the air warmed up. I unpacked my laptop, typed some notes, and tried to settle in. The quiet of the basement was strange, thick in a way that felt heavier than normal silence. I could hear faint vibrating noises from the pipes inside the walls, and occasionally something creaked overhead, probably from the house shifting in the cold. But every sound echoed a little too sharply in the low-ceilinged room. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing footsteps upstairs. Not fast ones, slow, spaced out, almost cautious. I assumed the host had come home. I didn't care. I wasn't planning on going upstairs anyway, and he had said the basement was completely separate. The footsteps continued for a while, then stopped. After they stopped, the basement felt even quieter. The heater hummed, the pipes clicked occasionally, and everything else just sat still. I brushed my teeth in the tiny bathroom, which had a mirror that was slightly foggy around the edges and a shower with a plastic curtain that stuck to my elbow every time I moved. When I finished, I lay down on the bed and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint scraping sound. It was soft at first, like something dragging lightly across the floor above me. I lay still in the dark, listening, trying to figure out if it was coming from inside the basement or from the house above. The scraping grew a little louder, then stopped. Then it started again, but this time from a different direction, closer to the small window. It wasn't a consistent sound. It came and went in short bursts, almost like someone dragging something across concrete outside. then pausing. I stared at the window, though I couldn't really see it in the dark except for a faint outline. The scraping came again, longer this time, and then I heard a dull tap, like something lightly hitting the glass. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon moving around the bushes. The window was small, barely big enough for me to fit through if I tried. Nothing could actually get in. I tried to calm myself, but even after the scraping stopped, I stayed awake. I kept listening. After several minutes of silence, I slowly shifted on the bed. That was when I heard something else. A metallic clink came from the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just a single soft metallic sound, like the handle being touched lightly. I froze completely. I stared at the door in the dark, trying to see the outline of it through the dim glow from the heater. Nothing moved. The sound didn't repeat. I lay there, barely breathing, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it shaking the mattress. Minutes passed. The heater hummed. The pipes clicked. Everything went silent again. Eventually, exhaustion started to weigh on me, and I drifted in and out of light sleep. Every small sound kept waking me up, but I was too afraid to get out of bed. I kept telling myself the morning would come soon. At around 4 a.m., I woke again, but this time the room felt different. The air was colder, and the heater had stopped humming. I sat up slightly and realized the power light on the heater was off. I reached over and tapped the little switch, but it didn't turn on. A second later, I noticed something else. The mini fridge wasn't making noise either. The power was out. The entire basement was completely silent. The air felt heavy again. I sat there in the darkness, staring at the window, then at the door. Then came the sound that made my skin crawl. Footsteps, slow ones, but not above me this time. They were outside the basement door. The gravel crunched under each step. The sound was unmistakable. The footsteps stopped right next to the door, just inches away from where I was standing earlier. I could hear soft breathing through the bottom gap of the door, very faint, but audible in the dead silence. I held my breath and didn't move a muscle. The breathing stayed there for what felt like forever. Then suddenly, very softly, the doorknob shifted. Not a full turn, just a tiny test, like someone checking if I had locked it. Thankfully, I had. The door clicked as the handle moved back into place. Then the footsteps backed away, slowly, crunching through the gravel again. They moved around the side of the building, then faded completely. I stayed frozen until the first dim gray light of morning crept faintly through the tiny window. When I finally felt brave enough to move, I packed everything in less than 2 minutes. My hands were shaking the whole time. When I opened the basement door to leave, I saw footprints in the gravel. They were clear, fresh, deep from the weight of someone standing still for a long time. They led straight to the door. But what made my stomach drop even more was the long, dark scuff mark on the concrete beside the window. It was exactly where the scraping sound had come from. Someone had crouched there long enough to drag their shoe over the wall again and again. I didn't check anything else. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away fast, not even bothering to look back at the house. Later, after I got home, I checked the listing again. The host had removed it entirely. No listing, no reviews, nothing. Like the place had never existed. I even tried to see if the host's profile still showed up, but it was gone. I never found out if the person outside the door was the host, a stranger, or someone who knew the place was usually empty. I never learned why the power went out at the exact moment the footsteps appeared, or how long the person had been moving around outside that basement. All I know is that those footprints outside the door, the scuff marks under the window, and the faint breathing I heard through the bottom gap were real. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining anything. And now, whenever I stay somewhere unfamiliar, I check every lock twice. I keep my bags packed near the door, and I never, ever book a basement Airbnb again. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to stay while finishing a project for work. I had been behind schedule for weeks, and I wanted somewhere away from noise and distractions. The listing I found was a small detached studio behind someone's house, about 15 minutes outside a small town. The photos showed a clean room with a bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a little patio. It looked peaceful and private. The price was cheap. I didn't think twice about it. I drove there on a Thursday afternoon. The neighborhood wasn't really a neighborhood, just a series of older houses on large pieces of land. Big yards, long driveways, lots of trees, and open fields behind everything. When I pulled in, the main house looked old but well kept. The studio was behind it, separated by a tall wooden fence. The host had left the gate unlocked and the key inside a lockbox near the door. What struck me immediately was how silent everything felt. No dogs barking, no cars passing by, no people around. Just dead quiet. Even the wind felt still. I told myself that was good, peace and quiet were what I wanted. The studio was small, maybe the size of a large shed, but clean. One bed, one small table next to it, a kitchenette with a microwave and mini fridge, a bathroom in the corner with a sliding door. Everything smelled like fresh paint mixed with old carpet. The ceiling was a bit low, but the place seemed fine. The strangest part was the single window. It was big and took up almost the entire wall facing the backyard. But the backyard wasn't really a yard. It was just a wide open patch of dirt that led into a thick line of trees maybe 50 yards away. Nothing separated the studio from the tree line. No fence, no lights, just open ground and then darkness. I remember standing at that window and feeling like the cabin was sitting too exposed, too easy to approach from any direction once it got dark. But I tried not to think about it. I set my laptop on the table, unpacked my bag, and got to work. The silence made it easy to focus. No interruptions, no noise, just me and my notes and the blank document I needed to fill. As evening came, the light outside faded fast. There were no streetlights nearby, so the only thing lighting the studio was the lamp on the wall. The backyard outside the big window became a black sheet, like someone had hung a dark curtain outside. I couldn't see a single thing beyond my own reflection in the glass. Around 9 p.m., I took a break and stretched. That was when I noticed something. The motion light above the main house turned on. It was faint from where I was, just a small glow through the gap between the houses, but noticeable. I waited for it to shut off. Didn't. It stayed on for a long time, as if something was still moving within its range. After maybe half a minute, it finally clicked off. I kept staring out at the darkness, wondering if the host had come home or if an animal walked by. I couldn't see anything from where I was. I returned to my laptop and tried to keep working, but I found myself checking the window every few minutes. The darkness outside felt too thick, too close. At around 10:30 p.m., something caught my eye. The motion light turned on again. This time it flicked on fast, like something ran right through the sensor. But again, I couldn't see anything from the studio window. Just the faint glow of the light behind the fence. Clicked off. Came back on again. Then off. Then on, like something was moving around the yard between the main house and the studio. I closed my laptop and just sat still, listening. The studio was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the fridge, my own breathing, and the soft click of the motion sensor going on and off. It made me uneasy. I didn't know why. Could have been a stray cat or even the host returning home late. But the pattern of the light didn't feel normal. It felt like someone walking back and forth. Someone pacing. I tried to shake it off. I brushed my teeth, changed clothes, and got into bed. I pulled the curtain across the big window, though the thin fabric didn't do much. It still felt like the darkness outside was pushing right against the glass. I lay there for maybe half an hour before drifting off. But I didn't stay asleep long. I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard something, a soft crunch, like someone stepping on dirt. At first I thought I dreamt it. I stayed still, listening with my eyes closed. Then it came again, a deliberate step, slow, heavy, not near the main house, not far away, right outside the studio. My eyes opened instantly. My heart started pounding. I didn't move at all. I just stared at the ceiling, listening. Another step, this one closer. The ground around the studio was covered in a thin layer of dry dirt and small rocks. You could hear every step clearly if someone walked through it slowly. I listened as the footsteps moved along the side of the studio, slowly, carefully, like whoever was out there didn't want to make noise. But the dirt couldn't hide it. Crunch, crunch, tiny pauses between each step. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside the big window, the one I had pulled the curtain over, the one facing the open yard. I felt my chest get tight. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loud. I just stared into the dark room, knowing someone was standing inches away on the other side of the wall. Another soft step, then a faint brushing sound, like a hand dragging lightly across the siding of the studio. The brushing went from one end of the window to the other, slow and steady, as if the person was feeling their way along the wall. Then nothing, just silence. I stayed frozen in bed for what felt like hours, barely blinking, waiting for the next sound. But nothing else came. Eventually, the exhaustion hit me again. Somehow, I drifted off around dawn. When sunlight finally crept through the curtain, I got up fast. My legs felt weak when I stood. I didn't even change clothes before grabbing my bag and throwing everything into it. I needed to leave. But as I opened the door and stepped outside, I stopped cold. Footprints. Not shoe prints with a clear sole pattern. Just the shape of someone's foot pressed into the dirt. The prints were deep, fresh. They led from the open yard to the side of the studio, then along the wall, then directly beneath the big window. The dirt under the window was disturbed more than anywhere else, as if someone had stood there for a long time, or crouched, or leaned in close toward the glass. I felt sick to my stomach. My hands were trembling. The early morning air felt colder than it should have. I walked around the studio once, fast, just to make sure no one was still there. The yard was empty. The tree line looked still. The motion light on the main house was off. I didn't see anyone, but the footprints were real. The brushed dirt under the window was real. The slow steps in the night were real. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station, where I sat in my car with the doors locked for almost 15 minutes trying to breathe normally. Later that day, I opened the Airbnb app to report what happened. Maybe someone else had complained before, but the listing was gone, completely removed. The host's profile didn't exist anymore either. It was like the place never existed at all. Even now, whenever I think about that night, the part that sticks with me is the brushing on the wall. The way it moved slowly across the side of the studio. The way it paused beneath the window. I keep imagining someone standing there, staring in at me through the dark glass, waiting for something. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted, but I know they were real. And now, every time I stay in an Airbnb, I check the windows twice. I look at the ground outside before I unpack. I make sure the place isn't exposed to open land. And I never choose a studio with a big ground-level window anymore. I learned that lesson in one long, quiet night I still can't forget. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and only a short drive from the small town I needed to visit for work. The listing said it was a quiet private guest house behind the main home, perfect for people who want privacy. The photos looked normal. A small single-story unit, a clean yard, a simple bed, and a tiny kitchen. Nothing fancy, but that was fine with me. I didn't care about anything other than having a place to sleep for 2 nights. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was how empty the whole street felt. It was still daytime, but something about the area felt strange, like people lived there but stayed inside all the time. The main house connected to the Airbnb looked old, with peeling paint and a front yard full of weeds. The guest house was behind it, separated by a narrow side walkway. There was no movement anywhere, just the warm air and the quiet sound of bugs. The guest house door unlocked easily, and the inside matched the photos. A simple room, a small bathroom, a kitchenette with a tiny fridge. Everything looked clean, but something about the smell felt off. Not bad, just old, like a room that hadn't been opened in weeks. I admitted I felt a little relieved once I dropped my bag and saw everything was normal enough. But I kept noticing tiny things. The blinds were shut tight. The window locks looked scratched, almost like someone had tried to pry them open or close too many times. And the back door that led to a tiny fenced area had an extra sliding bolt that didn't appear in the photos. It wasn't a big deal, but I kept staring at it because something in me wondered why it had been added. By late afternoon, I tried to settle down. I walked around the small room, checked the bathroom, checked the kitchen. I kept hearing small noises, like faint movement from the main house, but nothing loud or concerning. I told myself it was normal. Older houses make noises. Around evening, I stepped outside to get something from my car. The air felt thicker than before. I noticed a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there earlier. No movement inside, just an empty car facing the guest house. I tried ignoring it and went back inside. Once it got dark, the whole neighborhood changed. There were no lights on in any nearby homes except the main house in front of mine, and even that house only had one dim light on by the front door. I felt uncomfortable walking around the room, so I kept the curtains closed and stayed near the bed, scrolling through my phone and trying to relax. As the night went on, I started hearing faint sounds outside. Not footsteps, not talking, more like slow shifting sounds, something brushing lightly against the side of the guest house. At first, I tried to dismiss it, probably a cat or a raccoon, but the sound kept happening every few minutes. Soft, slow, almost careful. I checked the peephole on the front door. Nothing, just darkness. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. The guest house felt too still and too isolated. The walls were thin, and every small noise felt amplified in the quiet. I must have fallen asleep for maybe 20 minutes when I woke to a new sound. This one was inside the guest house. Not loud, but clear. A tiny click like metal shifting. I stayed still in bed and listened. Another small metallic noise. Then a faint, slow pressure against the floorboards, as if someone was putting weight down very carefully. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly. I just stared into the darkness and tried to understand if I was imagining the sound or if someone was actually inside. The noise stopped completely. The silence felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath with me. I lay there in the dark for what felt like 10 or 15 minutes, afraid to sit up. I kept telling myself it might have come from the main house or maybe the fridge cycling on. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I finally forced myself to get up. I didn't turn on the lights. I moved slowly across the room, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. Nothing looked disturbed. The front door was still locked. The back door bolt was still in place. Everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the bathroom door. When I went to bed, that door had been open. I remembered it clearly because the dark doorway bothered me, and I had looked at it more than once before closing my eyes. Now it was almost shut. Not fully, but just barely open. Enough to show a thin line of darkness that didn't feel right. I walked toward it, feeling the floor creak slightly under my feet. I pushed the door open slowly. The bathroom was empty, small, clean, silent, but the window was unlocked. I had locked it earlier without even thinking, because that's something I always do when I stay somewhere new, and I remembered the firm click when it locked. Now it was pushed up 1 inch from the frame. Just an inch, but enough to confirm without doubt that someone touched it. I shut it and locked it again, pressing it down harder this time. My hands were shaking. I backed out of the bathroom and stood in the middle of the room, trying to think. I didn't want to stay there, but I didn't know if someone might be outside, maybe even watching the windows. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm myself. The air felt thick again, like the room was slowly heating up from pure fear. After a few minutes, I decided I couldn't stay there until morning. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew I had to get out. I grabbed my bag and turned on just one light so I wouldn't draw too much attention. I checked the peephole again. Nothing. No shadows, no movement. When I opened the door, the night air hit me hard. It smelled like dry dirt and something else. Something bitter, almost like burnt rubber. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me as quietly as I could. The black sedan was still parked across the street, but now there was a person sitting in the driver's seat. The figure wasn't moving, just sitting there, facing the guest house directly. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't know if they had been there the whole time or if they had slipped into the car recently, maybe right before I came out. The street was completely silent. The houses around me were dark. I felt totally exposed standing there alone in the open. I moved fast toward my car, trying not to look directly at the sedan. My hands kept slipping on the handle because they were sweaty. When I finally got the door open, I slid inside and locked it immediately. I started the engine as quietly as I could, though a car engine never feels quiet when you're terrified. I backed out of the small driveway, keeping my eyes on the mirror. The sedan didn't move at first, but as soon as I turned onto the road, I saw its headlights turn on. My chest tightened so much it hurt. I drove faster. The sedan pulled onto the road behind me. Not close, but close enough to make it clear they were following. I kept going, passing the few dark houses and turning toward the main road that led back to town. I didn't even care where I was headed. I just wanted distance. The sedan stayed with me for almost 10 minutes. No turn signals, no passing, just steady, quiet trailing. I kept expecting them to speed up or pull beside me, but they didn't. They just stayed behind, like they wanted me to know they were there but didn't need to get closer. When I finally reached the main town area, with lights and people and open gas stations, the sedan turned off and disappeared down a side street without hesitation. Like they had gotten what they wanted. Like they just wanted me gone. I didn't go back to the Airbnb, not even to grab the leftover stuff I forgot in my panic. I drove straight to a hotel in the next town and stayed there until morning. My body felt numb the entire night. The next day, I opened the Airbnb app to leave a message about what happened, but I noticed the listing was gone. Not booked. Gone completely, like it had never existed. The host's profile was also removed. No reviews, no trace of the property. I reported it to the platform, but I never received any explanation. They said they would look into it, but nothing ever came of it. For weeks after that, I kept thinking about the bathroom window. That 1-inch gap. Someone had lifted it carefully, slowly, like they didn't want me to hear, and then they must have hidden somewhere close, watching and waiting. I still don't know who was in that sedan, whether they were connected to the host or just someone who watched the guest house. But I know for certain that someone entered the place while I was in it, and someone chose to follow me when I tried to leave. The worst part is that nobody will ever convince me it was just a coincidence. I know that neighborhood wasn't empty. It was watching me the whole time, and I'm just glad I left before finding out what would have happened if I stayed even one more hour. I booked the Airbnb because it was the only affordable place near the coast during the week I needed to travel. Work had sent me to a small town far from anything familiar, and all the hotels were either fully booked or too expensive. The Airbnb looked plain but normal. A studio attached to the back of a house, tucked away on a quiet street. The reviews were short but all positive, and the photos showed a clean room with white walls, a simple bed, and a small kitchen. I didn't think twice about it. When I arrived in town, the sky was already gray and heavy. I drove through narrow streets and past rows of strange houses, each one almost looking abandoned. Most had curtains drawn tight, and barely any lights were on even though it was late afternoon. It made the whole place feel frozen, like time had stopped there years ago. The Airbnb property was at the very end of a dead-end street. The main house looked old and sunburnt from years of salt air. Paint was peeling, and one of the windows looked cracked from the corner. The yard was overgrown with dry weeds, and the side gate hung crooked on one hinge. Behind the house, partly hidden by a leaning fence, was the studio I would stay in. I parked my car and carried my bag to the door. The air smelled like damp wood and something sour, like garbage left out too long. The door had a keypad, and when I typed in the code, the lock clicked open. Inside, the room looked exactly like the photos, but somehow emptier. The air felt still and slightly warm, as if the place hadn't been aired out in a while. I noticed dust on the windowsill and a few long scratches on the wooden floor near the bed. It looked like furniture had been dragged around more than once, or maybe someone had tried to move something heavy. I walked around slowly, taking everything in. There was a small kitchenette, a little fridge that hummed loudly, a tiny bathroom with a yellowed shower curtain, and a bed pushed against the left wall. The blinds were down, and the room felt closed off from the world. I should have opened the windows to let air in, but something about the silence outside made me hesitate. It wasn't normal quiet. It was the kind of quiet that feels watched. I tried to brush off the feeling and unpack my things. But as I put my clothes on the small dresser, I noticed a faint mark on the wall beside it. It looked like a fingerprint, smeared almost like someone had dragged their hand down the wall. I didn't want to think too much about it, so I ignored it and kept unpacking. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I stayed inside because I felt strangely uncomfortable being out on that street. Every time I peeked outside, I never saw anyone walking or driving, not even a dog, just houses sitting still with their curtains closed. I made some food, sat on the bed, and tried to distract myself. By evening, the air grew colder, and the room felt even more silent. I could hear the faint sound of wind outside, but nothing else. No cars, no voices, no normal neighborhood noise. It felt like the whole place had emptied out. Once it got dark, something shifted in the atmosphere. I had all the lights on, but the room felt dim anyway, like the shadows stuck to the corners. I tried watching something on my phone, but the weak Wi-Fi made the video stop every few seconds. Eventually, I put my phone down and just lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. That was when I heard the first sound. It was faint, coming through the thin wall from the direction of the main house. A slow, heavy dragging sound, like something rough sliding across the floor. Then silence. A few minutes passed, and I heard it again. A soft thud, like something being set down gently. The kind of sound that wouldn't normally bother me, but somehow in that quiet room it felt wrong. I sat up and listened harder, trying to convince myself it was normal house noise. But the sounds kept happening at strange intervals. Not steady, not random. Almost like someone was moving slowly from room to room in the house next door. I didn't want to think about it, so I turned off the light and tried to sleep. But the darkness made everything worse. The window blinds rattled softly even though the wind wasn't strong. The fridge hummed in a way that almost sounded like breathing. The floor popped from temperature changes, and each sound made my heart jump. I lay there for at least an hour before finally drifting into a light, uneasy sleep. I woke up to a new sound. This one wasn't from the main house. It was from inside the Airbnb studio. A dull, slow creaking noise, like weight shifting on wood. I froze. My eyes were open, but I didn't move. I didn't want to believe I had heard it. I waited, holding my breath. Then it happened again. The sound came from somewhere near the small kitchen, like someone taking a careful step. The wood under the carpet groaned slightly. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Someone was in the room. I stayed still, barely breathing. My mind was racing so fast that I felt dizzy. I tried to tell myself it was the fridge or the pipes or anything else. But deep down, I knew none of those things sounded like a slow, deliberate step. Another faint creak came from the corner near the bathroom. Then another closer to the dresser. Slow, careful, spaced out like someone was trying not to make noise. Couldn't take it. I slowly slid my hand toward my bag, trying to keep my breathing controlled. I didn't open the bag. I just wanted the comfort of touching something familiar. My fingers brushed the zipper, and the tiny sound felt loud in the dead air. The room went quiet again. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The silence grew heavier with each second. The whole place felt like it was holding something in its chest. Then, very faintly, I heard another sound. A soft, slow scraping. It came from the floor right next to the bed. Like something or someone was crouching there, only a few feet away from where I lay. I felt cold all over, like my blood had stopped moving. I didn't move for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. My whole body was shaking, but I kept every muscle locked. I stared into the dark room, seeing nothing but shapes. I finally decided I had no choice. I needed to leave. I moved my hand slowly, inch by inch, toward the side of the bed. I felt the edge and used it to steady myself. Then I counted silently in my head, trying to gather the courage to move. When I pushed myself up, the mattress made a soft noise, and the room instantly reacted. I heard a quick, sharp shift, the same sound wood makes when someone quickly adjusts their weight. It came from the far corner now, as if something had darted away from the bed. I stood up in one motion and moved to the door. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely unlock it. When the latch finally clicked, I pulled it open and stepped outside into the cold night air. The yard was completely dark, and the only light was a weak street lamp down the road. I didn't look back at the studio. I didn't even stop to breathe. I walked fast toward my car and unlocked it. My fingers felt numb, but somehow I got the door open. As I sat inside, I glanced back at the dark outline of the studio. The curtain in the window was slightly lifted, just a corner of it, just enough that someone inside could see out. I started the car and drove away, all the way to the next town without stopping once. My hands were shaking the entire time, and every shadow on the road looked like something following me. The next morning, I returned with 2 police officers. When we entered the studio, the place looked untouched. But the officers found something I had missed in the panic of the night. A small square cut out under the bathroom sink, hidden behind a loose panel. It led to a crawl space that connected under the main house. Inside the crawl space, there were flattened blankets, empty food wrappers, and old water bottles. Someone had been living down there. Someone who could move quietly under the floor. Someone who could slip into the studio through the loosened panel and stand only a few feet from the bed without being seen. They never found the person, and the host denied knowing anything, though the whole Airbnb listing disappeared a few days later. I think about that night often, about the slow steps in the dark, about the scraping sound right next to the bed, about how long someone must have been hiding under that house, waiting for the next guest to stay alone in that studio. And every time I remember the way the curtain was lifted when I left, I'm grateful I got out before whoever was inside decided to do anything more than watch.